When a lost hiker stumbles upon an erratic old man living in the woods, he could never have imagined the nightmare that awaits. Welcome back to Movies Explained. Today's film is a thriller from 2022 titled, Old Man. The movie begins in a rundown cabin in the middle of the Smokies forest. An old man is sleeping on the bed before he startles awake after hearing a voice. He calls out to someone who he calls Rascal, telling him to come out as he roams the cabin to find him. The old man screams out for Rascal from the front door, then grumbles about Rascal leaving him again and plans to kill him as he sips on his moonshine. Suddenly, he hears someone knocking on his front door. He draws his shotgun and approaches the door cautiously before slamming it open, revealing a cheerful-looking man. The young man is shocked to see a shotgun aimed at his face. The old man asks him where Rascal is, but the man doesn't know what he's talking about. It turns out that Rascal is the old man's dog, and the young man introduces himself as Joe. Joe says that he got lost in the woods and stumbled across the old man's cabin to ask for help. The grumpy old man responds by asking if his wife sent Joe to come there and take him away, which Joe declines. The old man decides to believe Joe for the time being, but threatens to shoot Joe if he is caught lying to him. Joe is invited to take a seat by the old man, who cautions him not to speak unless he is questioned. During the impromptu interrogation, we find out that Joe had trekked into the woods alone and gotten lost. The old man asks him why he traveled alone and how he became lost, but Joe responds that it is a long and unbelievable story. The old man claims that incredible things can happen in the woods and that he might be able to understand what happened to Joe. He claims that this cabin is extremely difficult to find and wonders how Joe came across it in the first place, but Joe can only respond that he doesn't know either. Joe claims he went off the trail and got turned around before noticing the smoke coming from the cabin's chimney. The old man isn't convinced but moves on to the second question of whether or not Joe is a psycho killer on the loose. He is worried that Joe might kill him in his sleep and eat him because he thinks psycho killers look like ordinary people just like Joe. After Joe promises that he's not a killer or a cannibal, the old man asks the third question, which he deems the most important of them all. He asks whether Joe is a salesman, and when Joe declines, he inquires as to what is in his bag. As Joe opens up his bag, he tells the old man that he only brought some trekking supplies like a first aid kit and toiletries. The old man checks the bag for himself and finds a knife inside. He inquires as to why Joe requires a knife, to which Joe responds that his grandfather, who used to take him to this forest when he was younger, warned him to be prepared because these woods can be both beautiful and dangerous. The old man agrees with the sentiment and decides that he will keep Joe's knife with him for the time being. Once the old man walks away from Joe, he tries to run out of the cabin. However, he stops once the old man fires his shotgun in his direction. The old man is perplexed as to why Joe wants to flee, so Joe explains that the old man appears insane, which scares him. The old man doesn't understand why Joe would feel that way, so instead, he offers a pact with Joe to promise that they won't hurt each other. Joe is on the verge of urinating in his pants, but the old man assures him that he won't harm anyone who is so terrified. He instructs Joe to use the restroom, but it's more like a bidet overflowing with waste. The old man tells Joe a tale about Spartans and calls him a weakling before telling Joe to look out the window at the woods. He offers Joe a place to stay the night in his cabin and warns that a big storm will arrive shortly after sundown. He promises to show Joe the way out of the woods in the morning. After Joe thanks the old man for his hospitality, they do a handshake spit to agree on the truce. The old man then offers to make them coffee in a dubious pot with equally dubious water. The two sit down together and talk about the old man's hate toward salesmen. He tells a story about how he used to be a salesman himself when he was younger but eventually quit because he was tired of deceiving people and himself. Joe then asks about the old man's wife, but he doesn't seem to want to elaborate further. Instead, he offers to tell Joe a funny story about a salesman who came to the cabin a long time ago. As the thunder rumbles, the old man starts recounting how the Bible salesman knocked on his door one day and asks him whether he has accepted the Lord as his Savior. The old man claims that the story becomes interesting at this point. The salesman sat where Joe is currently sitting after being invited inside and given coffee and cake. The salesman was a very devout Christian man, but because he was a salesman, the old man thought that it was only a persona. So the old man felt compelled to test the salesman's faith by asking him a few questions about God and his fate as a mere salesman. The salesman believed that God had a plan for him and had allowed him to meet with the old man for a reason. The old man continued by claiming that if he is a dangerous man, God must despise him for placing him in his path. Joe asks the old man if he is a dangerous man and if he harmed the salesman. The old man denies it, claiming that all he did that day was instill the fear of God in him. He seems to be done with his story, but Joe insists on knowing what he had done to the salesman. He eventually admits that he had drugged the salesman's coffee and put him to sleep, which causes Joe to panic since he has been drinking the coffee that the old man made earlier. The old man continues his story, saying that he had tied up the salesman to his hot stove and blindfolded the man using his necktie. This lasted for a few hours, causing some burns on the salesman's backside. Joe cuts off his story, asking why he did such a thing. The old man simply says that he didn't trust the salesman and wanted to scare him so he would answer the old man's questions truthfully. After the salesman had regained consciousness, the old man says that he started to pray to the Virgin Mary over and over until he stopped and his head drooped, but when he poked him, he continued praying. In the end, the old man says that he freed the salesman and pointed him out of the woods, though not before he warned the man to never come back. Joe wonders again why he did all that, and the old man mentions that he doesn't believe God exists because of all the misery he's seen on earth. The old man offers Joe more coffee or alcohol, but Joe declines both out of fear of being drugged as well. The old man assures Joe that he will keep his word on not harming Joe, and insists that they drink together. He grabs a couple of jars of moonshine that he made himself and gives one to Joe, toasting to all the death and beauty in this world. The old man sits together with Joe and starts to smoke. He asks Joe where he's from, and Joe tells him where he grew up and that he and his wife moved to Knoxville. His wife's name is Jeannie, and she's a second-grade teacher, while Joe himself works for her family's moving company. After the old man summarizes his life down to a single sentence, it seems to make Joe feel like he lived a very boring life, though the old man assures him that it's how most people's lives are. As their conversation continues, Joe tells the old man that he feels like life is conspiring against him. He feels like something is suffocating him and wants to destroy his life. The old man sympathizes with Joe, asking him to elaborate on how he feels. Joe describes it as standing in a pool of cement that slowly hardens and makes him unable to move, but he can't do anything about it. All his life he's done everything that's expected of him and never broke the rules, yet somehow this weight has been crushing him lately. Noise cuts off Joe's story, and the old man gets up from his seat, saying that they need some wood to keep the fire going. He opens a door and tells Joe to grab some logs while asking Joe if he has talked to his wife about his problem. Joe says that he hasn't because Jeannie has been a bit distant lately, which the old man can relate to with his ex-wife. Nonetheless, he advises Joe to inform his wife in case she can assist him in dealing with the intense emotions he's been experiencing. Joe, however, isn't convinced because of their recent problems. He says that he and Jeannie seem to come from different worlds as she was raised in a wealthy family, unlike himself. Another issue is that they're having trouble conceiving a child together, which causes some strain. Jeannie believes Joe is the impotent one, so she has been seeing someone about it, though Joe does not elaborate. The old man tells Joe that a good wife must appreciate her husband and what he provides for her, claiming that his ex-wife was ungrateful during their marriage. Joe asks him about how his marriage ended, and he answers that his ex-wife finally figured out how to really hurt a man. The old man then shifts the subject by asking Joe if he truly doesn't remember how he ended up getting lost and finding the cabin. He tells Joe to recount his steps from the beginning, so Joe starts from when he drove to Elkmont from Knoxville because he wants to hike along the Little River. He says he wanted to go to Little River because returning to a happy place might help him deal with his negative thoughts. Continuing to recount his steps, he claims to have heard groans along the way. He began to follow the moans, which led him off the path, and as the moans became louder, he ran deeper into the forest until everything turned black. Unable to find his way back, he decided to keep walking until he came across a waterfall and a clearing. That was when Joe eventually found the cabin. After hearing Joe's story, the old man says that it's always the same words. Joe asks him what he means, and he starts telling the story about the native Indians who used to live in the area and their obsession with the Purple Lake. The lake is supposedly hidden somewhere in the Smokies forest and only the animals can find it. The animals would never show the Indians where it is because supposedly, one sip of the water from the purple lake would heal all of their ailments. The old man wasn't feeling well mentally a long time ago, and he thought he could find the purple lake and be healed. He couldn't find it, but one day he heard the same moans that Joe had heard and decided to follow them. The old man also went unconscious like Joe, but when he woke up, he was faced with the female lion whose head now rests above the fireplace. He killed the lion with a sharp rock, which is when the moans stopped. Ever since then, the old man has been staying there in the cabin with his dog. He concludes the story by instructing Joe to load some logs into the stove while he goes to get some canned food for them to eat. Meanwhile, Joe slowly grabs his knife and says that he hasn't been completely honest with the old man. He says that he had a bad fight with his wife before he came to the woods. The old man brushes it off while Joe walks away, and suddenly, a man wearing a hat and coat comes into the cabin and starts skinning a dead animal in front of the fireplace. It turns out that he is Rascal, who returned from the woods after hunting dinner for them. The old man inquires about Joe, but Rascal responds that he is insane because there is no one else there except them. Rascal mocks and acts harshly towards the old man, prompting him to aim his shotgun at Rascal, who seems unfazed. Rascal always makes him think of the time he got lost in the woods after doing what he did to his wife, which makes him afraid of Rascal. The old man inquires as to what he did, but Rascal instead shows him some purple water in a vial, purportedly from the purple lake. He forces the old man to drink it, claiming that it will heal him. When it's finished, a chest opens and a woman's hand emerges. Rascal tells the old man to get into the chest before closing it. He appears in a hallway and he sees a picture of Joe and Jeannie, before turning into Joe himself. The old man turns out to be Joe all along, and when he opens the door, Joe sees Jeannie sleeping with another man. He grabs the shotgun and aims it at the man and shoots him, before killing Jeannie with his knife. Meanwhile, the older Joe sees Jeannie in the cabin and asks her to stop. He tells her that he doesn't want to do this anymore. He kneels in front of her and recites a prayer, but she says it doesn't work that way before getting back into the chest. The movie ends with Rascal, who turns out to be the slightly older version of young Joe, telling the old man to rest. While Rascal goes outside, old Joe returns to bed, but the entire story repeats itself, trapping Joe in an endless cycle of misery. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe for more videos.